This is New Rural Virginia, reclaiming rural leadership through conversation featuring real voices, real issues from the heart of the Commonwealth. Hey y'all, so glad you're here for another episode of New Rural Virginia's Candidate Spotlight. I'm Parson Brown.
And I'm Larry Wohlers, and we are your podcast hosts. We represent New Rural Virginia, which is a nonprofit that focuses on the important issues that will shape the future of Virginia's rural economy. Parson, we've had some great conversations over the last few weeks. So starting out with Joy Powers in House District 51, and then Angela Chainer and 56, and just last Sunday, Jack Bennington in HD 61, right around us here in Fauquier and Rappahannock counties. Have been really great conversations for our listeners. If you hadn't had a chance, you can find those on our website at newruralva.org.
Yeah, we're also streaming now on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. So
we are high tech.
Trying to talk to everybody, right?
That's right.
So yeah, we had some really great conversations, and all of the previous candidates, everyone that we speak to, are unique in their own way, and their districts are as well. But the one common thread in these conversations that I've noticed is that they're not really career politicians, people who have excelled at their work in their respective fields. They share a commitment to public service, to community, and a sense that people deserve better. And that seems to be the thread that is consistent. That seems to be what has inspired and led each of them to run for office.
Exactly. And that's why we are really excited today to have with us another candidate who throughout has really focused on taking care of other people, both in her personal life, the people closest to her. She was a caregiver for parents, but also professionally, having spent 30 years as a policy advocate with a real expertise on healthcare, right, which is a critical issue for all of us. And that person is Sara Ratcliffe, House District 62, which comprises Greene and Madison counties and large parts of Orange and Culpeper counties.
Sara, welcome. Welcome to the conversation and welcome to our podcast.
Thanks. I'm excited. I was saying in an earlier conversation, this is my very first podcast. You guys are breaking me in. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I told you we'll try to make it easy on you. Let's start by what led you, after years of working to put smarter policies in place to help the rest of us. What made you decide to run for state legislature? And also, this is not the first time you've run for office, is it?
It is not. As you said, or as Larry said, I spent 25 years at the time, 30 years overall, working in state and federal legislatures, Congress and state legislatures. I worked in places from Albany to Austin and Sacramento to Richmond, really with state legislators. So I understand and worked closely with folks, dedicated public servants from across the country, including our folks here in Richmond, understand how state policy works. That's what I did most of my career. I did work with Congress. But at the end of 2020, the organization that I had been part of for a dozen years and had led for the last couple went through a leadership transition. And there's a lot of transition happening in our country and in my life and in other parts of every part of life at the end of 2020. So I thought, I'm going to step away. I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to, spend some time with my dogs and my family and enjoy my home here in the 62nd. I just take a little bit of a break. And being the policy geek that I am, a nerd for policy, I will say, I thought it was going to be really fun to watch the certification of the election. I thought, nobody else will be watching this. I'm going to watch C-SPAN. I'm going to get all of my policy nerd juice. So I watched January 6, 2021 happen in real time. The day both and the events took place, I was horrified and scared for people I knew who worked in those buildings and worked in that body. But I also was just shocked that it was allowed to happen, even that it got that far that fast. And so what it came to me was the idea that I can't sit on the sidelines, even though I had dedicated my work to government adjacent work and government relations and policy advocacy. So at the time, my home county of Greene County was in a district a little bit further south. And there was a 20-year incumbent who had not had a challenger in a couple of years, couple of cycles. And so I made some phone calls and talked to some folks and threw my hat in the ring in 2021. After redistricting, my home county was folded into what was then the 30th district and now is the 62nd district. And I heard from folks then that the then 8-year incumbent really wasn't present, wasn't visible, wasn't actively in the community. You had a high profile in a lot of ways, but not in the actual community. And they were really looking for someone to step up. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm new district. So it sort of was a new race. And after that experience in 2023, my local community, the committee leaders and others, constituents in the community really asked me if I would please run again. This is my third time's a charm, we hope. And then we're really in a moment, I think, where having someone like me show up and try to make this district better represented is what hopefully will push us over the top.
And still she persisted. And showing up is the most important thing, I want to add.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
I will emulate that, but we'll try.
I think for a lot of our listeners, especially the ones in urban areas, when they hear house district number, their eyes kind of glaze over, right? What is it? 56, 51, 62, whatever. But each of our districts is special in its own way. And yours has, I think, a beautiful area up in the mountains, but then also prime agricultural land. Tell us what's special about your district and about the people there. What makes it important?
So for context, we are nestled just east of the Shenandoah National Park and the Shenandoah National Range. My district straddles Route 29. If you draw a triangle between Culpeper, Charlottesville, and Fredericksburg, that's the heart of the Piedmont. That's the 62nd district. So largely rural. We have a few towns and cities, but mostly it's rural and smaller towns. I think the thing that makes us most special certainly is the people. That's the first thing. When my husband and I first moved out to this area and we found our house, we were really amazed by the warmth and the generosity and community spirit that lived in the people who live here. We joke around about the come heres and the from heres because there are certainly folks who've been here for generations and they are as proud as they can be to have that history. But then there's a lot of us who are not from here, but come here and make it our home by design. And I think that we equally feel connected to the land and connected to the community, but also grateful that we found our forever home, at least for my place. That's true.
Sure.
And then the other thing, I think the other two things that really make my district special to me, although certainly not unique in this region, is the natural beauty. The natural, as you said, we're in the shadow of the mountains and the rolling hills and the natural resources that are here, whether that's public land or open space and fields. We have lots of cows, lots of goats, lots of farmland, and also lots of public lands and parks, which is great. What I found after having lived in the Washington, D.C. area and Northern Virginia for many, many years is there's an ease of pace. It's a little slower. It's not, certainly people are busy and have their lives, but the frenetic pace that sometimes happens in downtown cities, in my experience, is just, it doesn't quite feel like it's as urgent here. People stop and talk to each other and stop and drive a little slower and wave as you pass the back roads, and it feels a little bit easier living.
Yeah, it's like when you're driving by in a rural community, it's like the universal rural language is like that little 2-finger wave to anybody as you're driving by. They just toss up a little wave as you're going by, no matter who it is.
Just acknowledge that somebody in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Your district, obviously, like we've talked about, its natural beauty, and you've got a great sense of American history there, and very productive agricultural sector. You've got so much to be proud of. It's beautiful, and it's also confronted by change, whether you're a come here or from here, and change isn't easy. So what are the problems that worry your constituents, and what do they hope their state legislatures will do for them, and what can you do to ease their nerves?
Yeah. So in general, of course, the main worry that I hear from folks is their economic security, right? Whether they're going to be able to afford the things to take care of their families and keep the jobs or livelihood that makes that possible. Certainly the cuts and the chaos and the consequences coming out of Washington, the uncertainty of that, today it's one tariff, next day it's not, we're going to cancel this contract, we're going to build a beautiful whatever. People don't like to live in imbalance and uncertainty. That's a really stressful thing. And so while people are worried about actual cost of groceries and housing and making sure they have what they need, they're also very worried about sort of what's going to happen. Not being sure of what's going to happen or how it's going to go is something that is like an underlying stress among everyone I talk to, no matter their walk of life.
That can impact the vote in quite a significant way.
Exactly. I think there are a number of people here who have one ideological bend or another, but a lot more folks don't spend most of their day talking about or thinking about or even paying attention to politics. Those of us who spend every waking hour thinking about it, I think, have to remember that most people people don't pay attention to who they're going to vote for or think about who they're going to vote for until sometimes the day before election day, and spend a lot of time and energy and certainly money to make sure people know there's an election and who's running and why, and make our case to the voters. But most people are busy with their lives. School started this week in my district, and folks are trying to get their kids on the bus and get the school supplies paid for, and vaccinations made and physicals gotten and all those sort of things. I think it's important for us as folks who are paying attention at that in the weeds level of politics and policy to remember that we need to be cognizant, be aware, have a little more grace for the fact that most people don't want to have these conversations 24/7. They just want you to tell them what you're going to do for them and what you want when you're knocking on their door. Like, why are you here? Like, it's July. Why are you knocking on my door about something that's happening in November? I don't have time for this. I think so those of us who are in the business of politics forget that sometimes.
Like, we sort of need to tone it down and speak to the person. I think that's kind of the premise of what we're doing here, is taking on the challenge to talk to rural voters.
Let's dig down a little deeper on agriculture, which has been historically so important for your district, facing, as is true of many rural areas, a lot of challenges: an aging farming population, potentially a real labor shortage if some of the Trump policies on migrants continue, and just the uncertainty that you talk about in terms of will the traditional kinds of support from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and others still be there. So what are the stress points, and especially what can the state legislature do to help?
I think when it comes to farmers' ag business here in the 62nd particularly, our farmers were really affected by the cancellation of USAID contracts. A lot of our producers relied on those export contracts. So figuring out where that economic backfill is going to come from is one really big, strong concern. The president's recent legislative juggernaut that is supposedly certainly going to cut some measure of the SNAP food stamps program. Again, folks who are able to bring their produce to farmers markets and what have you, to have folks have the money to spend on those and use their benefits for that. Those are smaller contracts, but it's still an important part of agriculture here. So I think it's both the uncertainty and the concern of the macro economy, the tariffs and what's going to happen and whether they're going to be able to keep their farms and where they're going to take their products to market. But it's also about what's going to happen when the cuts and the chaos, frankly, come rolling down. How is Virginia and the state legislature in particular going to put a stopgap on that, or backfill that funding, or backfill the needs of the community? So agriculture doesn't exist in a vacuum, certainly. There are folks who are in need of healthcare, and as our farmers and farming community get older and lots of the newer generation don't continue in the farming work and the farm work, there's some tough decisions coming down the pipe. And I think figuring out how to balance agriculture and historical landscapes while also making room for growth and what that looks like also a big concern. Lots of who's going to make that decision, who's going to decide what land gets used for what and how things are rezoned. So there's a lot of questions and not a lot of answers. And we're hoping with a General Assembly, if we can keep and hopefully even expand the majority in the General Assembly, and with a future governor who's very supportive of agriculture and agriculturalists,
That's right.
that we can really make sure that we are looking out for those folks and that the rural communities are represented in a way that maybe hasn't been in a while in Richmond.
Right. And taking a real pragmatic, practical approach, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, to cuts and chaos. Yeah.
Yes.
This is something I'm really interested to hear from you about is healthcare. And as you've said, you can't talk about the economy without talking about healthcare. And I agree. And luckily for us, you have some incredible knowledge about the healthcare sector. So I'll just ask you straight up, like, what can be done?
So there's a couple of really important things that we need to work on and secure. One is basic access, and that access to healthcare. And that's both how do you pay for it? So whether we're going to make sure that we support and sustain our Medicaid expansion and ensure that folks who are at the lower end of that scale have access to insurance and coverage, or whether it's straight up access. Do you have enough doctors and providers within your local area to get an appointment when you want to? I've heard from people across the district, we are in a bit of a healthcare desert. We certainly have very fine medical facilities sort of at either ends. But for many people, and especially the backsides of the counties that I'm hoping to represent, you have to drive 30, 40 minutes, sometimes 2 hours to get to a doctor. And that's when you can get an appointment. The one thing that I think is not yet solved from the pandemic, certainly not in the rural areas, is that backlog of access to care. So finding new and better ways to shore up local community-based healthcare options, whether that's additional urgent care facilities in smaller communities, whether that's ensuring that we're allowing other practitioners, nurse practitioners, training nurses to come in and do some of that primary care work so that when there is an emergency, the emergency rooms that are available aren't full. There's a lot of things we can do. And I think the things that's most important to me and personally, and I know is a concern for a lot of folks I've talked to, we have a really big group of folks reaching elderly population. The baby boomers are going to hit 75, 80 in this next couple of years. My parents were baby boomers, and I certainly am aware of that constituency. And those folks are not stopping. They're still very active and sometimes even still working. But in your late 70s, early 80s comes some healthcare needs. And often, whether somebody can stay in their home, whether somebody can continue to drive themselves, what does that mean when they're no longer able to drive at night, for example? So there is no public transportation in my community, virtually. So figuring out how to allow people that independence and the care for them to have the options to figure out how to take care of themselves and their significant others, whether that be parents or their spouses, as our population ages, is going to be, I think, a major concern in the next decade. And it's only going to get bigger as we get further along in that process.
On elderly people, if they don't have that support system to travel to find a medical facility. And also during the pandemic, if the one thing we learned is like a lot of things can be done remotely. We're still using a lot of telehealth options throughout the country, but we face a problem in rural communities, folks that, especially in the mental health area, that if they could just have broadband, we could find solutions and help more people.
I think that's a really important point. Before I lived in this area, I would hear about broadband and connections and how important it was. And I thought, oh yeah, that's important. But until you live every day without access to reliable cell phone service or via broadband, it is a different reality. You're driving up over the mountain. You can't make a phone call in the car. You can't get directions because you don't have service. I don't have broadband in my house to this day. I have access to the internet, but it's sometimes tricky when it's raining or Tuesday and it just decides to go out.
We're doing that broadband reality on every episode of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking to rural people.
So I think that when you ask about sort of the concerns that people have or the what we need to do, these issues are all connected, right? Whether somebody has the money to keep their job and has insurance to cover their family, whether somebody has access to a doctor that's nearby enough that they can get their elderly parent to it and take off work to do so, whether somebody who wants to have a baby doesn't have to drive an hour to get maternal health care, and whether we have the broadband and access to the new technologies, which are making it a lot easier for us all to be connected, but only if you have the technology in your house to be able to do that. When my mother-in-law was with us in the middle of the pandemic, we moved her up from Florida at her request, and she lived with us for a year, her last year in her 90s. She had a pacemaker, and she had a machine that sent her data directly to her cardiologist and the new cardiologist that we got her up here. And that sometimes didn't work because we didn't have access to the technology to make it what was what happened. So the idea that we can, and there are lots of options to care for ourselves and our families and need healthcare options and new technology is great, but only if it's accessible to everyone. And it should be the case that where you live changes what quality of life you're allowed to have. That is certainly not fair. Right. So one of the reasons why I am running and one of the reasons why I hope to gain the votes of my community is because I really want to make sure that someone in Richmond is showing up for our communities. Right. I say often on the trail that decisions are made by those who show up. We here in the 62nd have had 10 years of someone who doesn't have local office hours, doesn't have a local office after a decade of being supposedly represented, doesn't go to things, we don't see them. If people don't know where you are and don't know how to talk to you, I don't know how you represent them, because the first most important part of representation, in my opinion, is listening to the folks you're trying to represent and hearing what their needs are, what their desires are. So I think that being part of the community you want to represent in a real way is first and foremost what we need to do as candidates, is to make sure that we are part of that community.
We aren't hearing much from people about the question of their freedom to make their own reproductive choices, I think, in part because people feel like it's kind of settled business here in Virginia, right? But the reality is the split between the two parties is very narrow in the state legislature, and a couple seats change could bring a new perspective and would have a very different approach in terms of people's freedom to make their own choices. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on that. Thanks for asking. The organization that I worked for was a reproductive rights organization. It worked in reproductive health and rights, again, with state legislatures across the country. I spent a long time talking about this issue and advocating for it. It's a very core belief of mine that without bodily autonomy, without the freedom to decide our own reproductive choices, we really aren't ever free. How, whether, when, how many, with whom you have children is one of the most personal decisions we will ever make. The idea that a politician or a clergy member is going to decide for me or for my sister or for my daughter what that should be and who that should look, what that should look like is very much against what I believe. It's also, frankly, not what most people want. There are lots of opinions along a wide spectrum about abortion in particular, but people, for the most part, don't want politicians to be making these decisions for them. And I think the last statistic I saw was that something like 67% of Virginians consider themselves pro-choice. And so I think that it is decided on that sense. Right. The people know what they want. They do not want interference from government or interference from those who have their own beliefs imposed upon someone else. But we are the only state in the South that has not yet put restrictions in law on reproductive health. So to some extent, that's a good thing. It's a great thing, but we need to protect that. And there is, as I'm sure you know, there's a constitutional amendment that is in the middle of a very multi-year process to protect that right in the state constitution. By leaning in and expanding our majority, the House of Delegates, we can ensure that we pass that next step on that constitutional process and send it to the voters in November. I am confident, as someone who has both studied this issue and lived it, that the voters of Virginia will absolutely want to protect freedom freedom to make those choices, the freedom to decide for ourselves once we put it to them. So we need to make sure that this General Assembly in 2026 passes that amendment one more time and sends it to the voters.
Let's jump over to another topic that is on everybody's minds, which is data centers. And Culpeper County is sort of ground zero for this debate, right? I think they've approved, I'm not sure if it's 8 new data centers or 10. It just keeps growing. And the number of electricity usage increasing by 10 times in the next few years. And then the power lines, and the water and the noise. It's a big question. What are your thoughts there?
So it's interesting because, as you say, Culpeper has gone one direction, a little bit more toward the Prince William, Fauquier area of data center row. And that it's a boon for Virginia to be this center for technology. It's great. There's nothing wrong with it, but it isn't right for every community. And Culpeper has made some of those decisions, much to some of the constituents that I've talked to, chagrin. I don't know that everybody was aware of all of the issues that data centers bring when those decisions were made. Well, I'll be curious to see if they actually happen because of that pushback that may be coming. But in other parts of my district, in Orange County and Greene County, certainly, we've just seen our neighbors down in Louisa County put down an effort to put a data center in. And I think that we really are struggling in the other counties in my district about the balance between protecting farmland and the natural landscape, the historical landscape that we're also proud of and that brings in so many tourists, so much history, while also trying to make sure we have economic growth and that our communities can build that growth smartly and effectively. So it's a big issue. I would be surprised if the other counties in my district are as amenable to data centers. Again, there's some movements happening and there's certainly some folks who are proponents of those projects, but it is going to be a big fight. It's going to be a long conversation. There's many meetings. The one thing I hear, whether it's from farmers or developers, people in my district really want to make sure that these decisions continue to be made at the local level. Do not want Richmond making a decision for other communities. They feel like that is a step too far. When I talk to people, regardless of which side of the issue they're on, they want local communities to be making the decisions about whether and what happens in the data center field. I'm going to hope that that is the thing that I will bring when I come to Richmond to represent them.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people everyone is talking about data centers, but there's so much information. It's a lot to absorb. I actually went to a training on data centers and learned a lot, but I'm still putting the pieces together. And the one thing that rural communities do know is they know their community. And I think that that's probably bottom line the most important.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think your point, Parson, about the demand in electricity and the huge demand in electricity, which is the thing that sort of people hear the most about. But in our rural communities, the other thing is data centers take a lot of water. And we already have some water shortages and water uses, some concerns. Certainly in 2 of my counties, they've been dealing with very difficult water issues for a number of years. So that, again, whether it's an environmental survey, whether it's making sure that the companies that are trying to put these data centers in are being as above board and as transparent as possible, making sure that the benefits that would come from a data center, whether that's jobs or other things, are real before they make the decision. All of these are great local community conversations that need to be happen and need to make sure that they're transparent
and rational. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Sarah, no one can deny that right now in America, we're very divided. Like, we are a polarized society in a lot of ways. And, a lot of voters don't look at the candidates, especially when you're in a rural race. They're looking at the label, the party, the brand, if you will. And you, as candidates running for delegate in Virginia, we're in pretty red districts. What do you say to them? The challenge to communicate with your neighbors who are across the aisle, how do you get them to look past the party brand and consider you as a person and as a candidate?
I think it is a hard conversation sometimes to get started. Many people, we go back to our conversation earlier about many people, everyday folks, are not paying attention to politics on a daily basis, on a minute-to-minute basis, right? We don't know all the ins and outs and whatnot. But they do watch the local news or the national news, and they do pay attention to what's happening at the national level. So people tend to think that's all politics is. But really, politics, the root of the word politics is people, right? It's supposed to be about local. It's supposed to be about who we are as a community. So we are as divided, I think, as we've been maybe since the Civil War, unfortunately. differently. But I also think that when I'm talking to folks across the fence or at their doorsteps, that's not the first thing they say. So I'm a Democrat and I don't hide that in any way. I'm a Democrat because I was raised that way and because I believe our ideas are better. And I think we have more solutions that work for more people. I've had more than one conversation with folks in the community who will say, "Doug, you're a Democrat, huh? I don't know." I'm like, well, tell me what are the things that most matter to you? And they say, "Oh, well, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not going to vote for you anyway." I'm like, well, I still want to know what you think, because when I win, I'm going to represent you regardless. So what's your most important thing? And what's the thing that you would like to change, or the thing that you love that you want to keep? And they stop for a minute and they think, "Oh, you care what I think, even though I just said I wouldn't vote for you?" And I'm like, "Let me know what you know." And then we have a conversation. And on more than one occasion, at the end of that conversation, they've been like, "Are you sure?"
Yeah.
But I also think I'm about making sure that people have what they need and that our communities are all able to thrive together. I live in a small little cul-de-sac, just 6 families, and we all are very different political views. But one by one, my neighbors have said, "I voted for you. I'm going to vote for you because I know you're a good person. I know you care about us." And when, we may disagree on national politics, but when we had a big snowstorm and our 80-year-old neighbor didn't have heat or lights, we all showed up to make sure she was okay and brought whatever she needed. When a tree falls on our little country lane and nobody can get to work, we all come out with chainsaws.
Absolutely.
Not me. I'm not a chainsaw person, but my husband comes out with the chainsaws and makes sure that folks can get where they need to go and do what they need to do. So my campaign in particular, we really tried to get folks started on the conversation about, "You're one of those, I'm one of these," as, "Yeah, but we're neighbors." So we're neighbors first. All politics is local. And the truth of the matter is, if you meet people where they are and talk to them about what they care about, that's the place to start the conversation and to bridge that divide. One of the things my campaign I've really tried to stress, I talk often about cultivating compassion and community. And what I'm about, I have compassion as a core value for me. It has always been the way that I move through the world. Is the first thing I think about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. Is this a compassionate view? Is this the compassionate? And being a part of a community means looking out for everyone and making sure that we are all where we need to be. I think that that's how we come back from the divide and the vitriol that we've seen these last few years. The national level is really exciting and it's fun to watch, and sometimes it's really scary. But how we talk to each other as neighbors, whether the trash cans get in on time, whether the roads are fixed and the schools are good, these are the things that most people live their lives caring about. And that's where we need to start.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah. We do want to make sure people know about your website, and you do have a great website and a whole lot of information on different issues. So I recommend that.
All my social channels and my website is just Sara4VA, Sarah's 4-letter word for people who don't remember it. And it's FORVA.com. So I encourage people to go there, read about my positions, read about my community, and reach out. There's a way to contact us on the website. I would love to talk to folks who want to, either in my community or in neighboring communities, who are interested to share their views.
Sarah, keep showing up and keep striving to be a good neighbor, and we wish you well.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate this.
New Rural Virginia Candidate Spotlight is a production of New Rural Virginia. Visit newruralva.org for more. Produced and co-hosted by Larry Wohlers and yours truly, Parson Brown. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode.